All right, now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the manual mode. Oh yeah, you'll see, we're gonna make it super easy for you. I've deconstructed it in very, very simple steps. A lot of photographers think, I don't know, for some philosophical reason, that shooting manual is better, or that that's the only way you should be as a photographer. Maybe that stems from the film days, I don't know, but never take anything from someone who tells you, hey, you only should shoot manual, only real photographers shoot manual. Nah, that doesn't matter. The most important for you as a photographer is that you're able to achieve, again, your creative vision. Remember that this is the most important. You have something in your mind, you visualized it, maybe you're seeing it, now you need to capture it. And it doesn't matter how you capture it, what matters is that you get your shot and you get your idea, you get your concept, you get your story, you get this out there in the world. This is how you're going to have an impact as a photographer. Whether you shot it in manual or auto, who cares, literally. But with that said, I love the manual mode for several reasons. You're able to have a lot of creative direction on the outcome, on the image you're going to be taking, and obviously something very important is to make sure that you get the effect that you want in your photo. Do you want your subject to be in focus? Do you want it out of focus? Do you want it to be frozen? Do you want it to be blurry? Do you want it to have a shallow depth of field, etc., etc.? We're gonna set all that in manual at once. Here is how I do manual mode super easily. First thing I'm going to set is my aperture. Why? Because my aperture is going to define the depth of field in my image, and obviously it's gonna tell me how blurry my background is. So if I want something super blurry, if I want a shallow depth of field, I'm gonna go with an aperture around f1.8 or as low as possible. Now, if I want more in focus into my image, obviously I'm going to have a f-stop that is higher, maybe f8, maybe f5. Obviously, this is the one thing I want to be in control of. This is usually what's going to dictate my photos. Do I want shallow depth of field or do I want something that is deeper? Remember, when you're changing your aperture, you're actually changing the amount of light that gets into your lens. We saw it the other day with a f-stop number that is small, you're getting a lot of light into your lens, and with this f-stop number that is high, you're getting a lot less light. And that's going to have an influence for our manual mode, you'll see in a second. Now, the second thing I want to decide on is my shutter speed. Why the shutter speed? Because once you've decided your depth of field, you want to know if you're going to freeze your subject or if you want it blurry. That is exactly how, as a creative director, you're going to be able to achieve that vision. So if I wanted to freeze the action, I would go at high shutter speed, and if I wanted that really cool light trail or slow shutter speed effects, I would go to slower shutter speeds. Now, there is third parameters we haven't talked about yet. I asked you to leave it in auto, and it is the ISO. So the ISO is basically going to change the way your camera is seeing the light through the sensor, meaning the sensor has a certain sensitivity, and when you change the ISO on your camera, it's going to see if you want more or less light. It's going to bring out more or less light from your image. There's a lot of technical details you can read about, but I think the most interesting thing to know is that the higher your ISO is and the more light you're going to have in your image, yet the more noise you're going also to induce in your image because of the sensor. And it works on the contrary also, that the smaller it is, the less noise you will have and the less light, okay? So why is it so important? Because you're going to have to balance between those three parameters to have something optimal. Do you want to have a super high ISO, although you're gonna have noise, so that you can freeze the action at night, for example, or maybe a f-stop not as high, but in order to have your ISO lower? Those three elements work together. So when you're moving one in one direction, the other two are going to move also. Let's do a quick exercise, and I'm going to show you how to get the right exposure. So you might have noticed on your camera, there is usually a -2 or -3 to +3, a little graduation that keeps moving when you're changing parameters. So let's try together. Take your camera, go in manual, and dial in an aperture, maybe like f4, f2.8, whatever you have, and then a shutter speed of 1/100 of a second, and your ISO, bring it to ISO 100. Now, what you will realize is that that graduation might be at 0, or it might be at -3, or +3, or -1, etc. What it means is that on the left of 0 towards a minus, it's underexposed, your image is underexposed, and on the right, it is overexposed. Why is it so important? Because now you can change your ISO setting in order to match the little graduation. You can bring it so that it aligns with 0, which means it is properly exposed. But if you don't want to induce too much noise, also, you might want to keep your ISO low and then change the shutter speed instead. You're gonna lower the shutter speed in order to achieve the same result. Here's kind of my rule of thumb with the ISO. It depends a lot on the camera model you have. The latest camera model and the more expensive, usually the better they perform at high ISO. But lately, as a rule of thumb, I try not to go over 12,800, and if I want something with a really crisp quality, I try not to go over ISO 3200. But it really depends on your camera. When I went from a Nikon D750 to a 7R III, I could go way higher in ISO and still have something clean. The noise that you induce with high ISO, as you can see on the screen, is something that is very difficult to remove afterwards in post. You can do work, but when you remove it, it gets smudged. So what I suggest is shoot right in camera as much as you can. Try to avoid going to ISOs that are too high. Okay, now the last thing you want to know is how your camera is working, because that little graduation showing you how your image is exposed also depends on how your camera measures light. So far we've been in the light metering mode called center average or center, and it takes most of the light, it measures most of the light in the center, which is very helpful. But there are other modes that can help in different circumstances. We'll talk about it in the advanced video on settings. Fear not. But for now, just remember that it also depends on how your tool is measuring light, okay, to get the right exposure. At the end of the day, nothing replaces taking the photo, looking at the result, and making sure it looks good for you. If it doesn't, you just change the settings. Again, if we recap, you start with your aperture. Set your aperture first, then set your shutter speed, depending if you want your subject blurry or not blurry, or if it's moving, if it's not moving. And last, get your ISO right so you get something properly exposed. And if your ISO is too high, then try to compensate with the other two. All right, that's it. Now, your mission, if you accept it for today, is going to be shooting in manual mode. I want you to dial in all those settings. I want you to play with the settings, change your aperture, change your shutter speed, change your ISO, and see what it does. Nothing replaces practicing with one's own camera. I might be speaking for hours. It's not going to change anything. It really is going to get under your skin once you start using it, once you start playing with it. And I wish you best of luck with that exercise. Share in the Facebook group your findings, how you like it. Do you prefer aperture priority, shutter speed priority, or manual? Let me know, or auto. Just let us know in the Facebook group. And with that being said, I wish you an amazing day. I'll see you tomorrow for another one. See ya. Bye.